As I've thought about this morning and kind of looking at this new series, it's just a 3-week series as we look at to what's in a name and what does that mean. I'm going to look at 3 different individuals within Scripture. And I think that it's appropriate on many levels when I think about the chaos that we've had here this morning a little bit. It's going to be a good day regardless because we are here and the Lord has called us here. While all of that is happening, I've lost my hearing in both of my ears. I can barely hear anything, and so it's been a real challenge there. And so I'm choosing to really focus upon what Jesus has for us today. This last week I was driving and I had left Walmart and got in and out, pretty early before I would run into anybody that I'd see, even just to kind of get what I needed and get going. And as I pulled up to the stoplight, there was a van next to me, and I had an image of it, but of course we can't see this. And she had a bumper sticker on the back of it. It was about this big, so it really caught my attention. And as I read it, I put my phone up my sleeve and was like trying to take a picture nonchalantly because it was so good in the sense that, hello, this is what it said. It was a name tag. And it said, hello, I'm trying. And for some reason, this really resonated with me personally. But on a bigger field of things, it probably would read well for any of us. Because there's so many times in this life that there's a lot of things that are thrown at us, and all we feel like we're getting by is that we're trying. We're trying to do the best we can. We're trying our best not to slip back into our old ways. We're trying to have a positive outlook when really it seems kind of dark. We're trying to stand firm in the face of opposition or pushback that we've been experiencing. We're trying to have faith. There's a situation that we're trying to really just muster the faith to be able to move forward. We're trying to have purpose, trying to find joy somehow, right? We're trying. And there are times it doesn't matter how much we try, how much we attempt to take even the high road or do the right thing or make the right choice. Life happens, and we have to kind of bumble through it. But as Kyle reminded us this morning, we were called here this morning for a purpose that he has for us. And so, Holy Father, I would pray that you open our minds and our hearts this morning to what it is we need to hear from you, because you know more acutely than we ourselves do of the battles that we're facing, the struggles that we're having, and to ask for you to move among us in your name, Jesus. I know that we may be trying, but God is here, and God is right there alongside of you through what you're trying to get through, and God is understanding of your weaknesses and your struggles that you have. And yet in all of that, even as he knows us so well, remarkably, this God of ours is calling us further. And he's calling us deeper into his presence, even as we're just maybe doing the best we can right now, and we're just simply trying to get by, and maybe not even so well as that. For our God is calling you by name, and he is calling you deeper into him. Jacob's life became that as a struggle. It began with a struggle, really, and struggle would follow him for 147 years of his life. Now, thank God he's ended that we live that long, seriously. Who would want to live for 147 years? But his struggle marked him from even when he was in the womb. For he wrestled there with his twin brother Esau, and when both boys were delivered, Jacob came out grasping behind his brother, grabbing onto his heel. More interesting than that is Jacob. His name would mean deceiver in Hebrew. This was the name that they chose to give him. And so here we have Jacob, the deceiver, had more going on than just this initial birth. Because when his mother, Rebekah, was pregnant, God revealed to her that she held two nations within her womb, and when they became adults, they would be divided. And one of these boys would be stronger than the other. One nation would be more superior than the other. And so the boys grew together in their nomadic life that they had. And Esau became that of a great hunter who loved the outside country. Jacob, content to hang on and hang around at the tents, he was a homebody. And so Esau, being a good hunter, was his father's favorite. And they had much in common. Jacob was favored, consequently, because of his mother. And this favoritism from their early lives set the stage, really, for a lot of destruction that would follow even into the next generation of children, which in time would almost cost Jacob's own favorite child's life. And so it was when Isaac, the boy's father's eyesight had faded, he decided it was time to make arrangements to pass on to him his blessing to the firstborn twin, the first son that had arrived, being Esau. Jacob had by this time already tricked and connived his brother out of something called a birthright, and for a bowl of stew. And now it was about to be something more than and more important than earthly wealth. Now, a bit of context here. Blessings were incredibly important in ancient days. This was a ritual. There was many times that one-time thing when a father would sit his son down and would speak hope into the life of this son. And it was at that time that he would tell him how much he treasured him. And the father would then speak words of prophecy over his future as to what they spoke. Quite honestly, for the receiver, this was about the only time that the boy would receive any word of spoken love or spoken encouragement into their lives. And so like a dried up land that was thirsting for water, and blessing was something more that every boy imagined of receiving one day. They just longed to hear positive words from their father of purpose and of fulfillment and of engagement and, of course, of their love. Well, it just so happened that Jacob's mother heard of the plan and went immediately to Jacob. And they concocted a story that they would deceive Isaac and get the blessing given to him instead of to Esau. And so due to his father's blindness, when the time came, Jacob snuck into the tent, posing as Esau. And in that moment, he received the blessing. And you can only imagine how well that went down when Esau found out. For from that day forward, Esau vowed that he would kill Jacob as soon as his father died, which would be for years that would last, this threat. Rebekah, the mother, became aware of Esau's plan, and so she warned Jacob and sent him to her brother Laban, who lived far away, where he could be safe and find a wife. It would be during that long trip, on the first night, Jacob had an encounter with God where a ladder to heaven appeared. And he saw angels running up and down with God at the top. And in that moment, God spoke to Jacob, giving him a tremendous hope. And so it's in your bulletins there. He said at the top of it opens like this. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you. I am giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth, and they will spread out in all directions, to the east and the west, to the north and the south, and the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. Once more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. And one day I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised for you. Now, by all accounts, this may have been Jacob's first encounter with God, his first exposure personally. And as a result, Jacob named that place Bethel, which meant the house of God, and he vowed in that moment after this had happened that he would serve him the rest of his life. But this was only an encounter. Yes, this was a promise. But Jacob, who had lived up to his name as deceiver, there was no heart change in this meeting that he had with God. He was still trying to do the right thing. Because of his own heart, he would fall in to trap after trap of himself. Well, he would settle in the land with his uncle, who offered him payment for work as a shepherd. And Jacob agreed to work for his uncle 7 years. And after those 7 years would return to marry Laban's daughter Rachel, who by this time he had fallen in love with. But Jacob was about to discover that Laban was just as much of a deceiver as he had been. For he met his match on some levels. For on that wedding night, after 7 years of labor for Laban, Laban substituted his oldest daughter, Leah, for Rachel. And so as the fury died down, Jacob agreed to work an additional 7 years for the real woman that he loved, which would be that 14 years total. So here he has now 2 wives, but Jacob would love Rachel more, which would bring tremendous strife in that household. It didn't help that Leah continued to have baby after baby, boy after boy, while Rachel was barren. Now, these boys would become eventually of Leah's 11 of the 12 tribes of Israel. And finally, Rachel became pregnant with her firstborn, Joseph. And it was then he decided that it was time with this brood of children to go back home. He needed to go back to his homeland. Laban, who had had free labor for the most part, asked for him to stay and what the price would be. Well, Jacob had been a shepherd there all of those years and asked for only to have the speckled and the spotted sheep and goats of the flock to be his own, that the rest would be Laban's. And it's unclear of why it worked, but Jacob put branches in front of the flocks, and when they mated, as a result, the offspring mainly were speckled and spotted. You see, God was blessing Jacob even in the flaws that he had, even in the struggles that were going on. And those flocks grew strong, and Laban's began to grow weak, and Laban's other sons grew irritated, and their attitudes changed. And it was then that God showed up, and he told Jacob that it's time, now you have to go home. Incidentally, a very wealthy man due to the flocks that he had. And this would be Jacob's second encounter. It says, "Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your father and grandfather and to your relatives there, and I will be with you." So Jacob packed his things, and he packed up his wives and the brood of children, and corralled all the flocks, and they began to head home. But there was a problem. He was going back to face his brother Esau for the first time in 20 years. And the last he knew, Esau still was out to kill him. So Jacob did what any normal person would attempt to soothe the meeting. He sent gifts ahead, hoping that it would soften his brother's feelings and be that of a peace offering. And waiting turned into a few weeks when finally word came that Esau was coming to meet him, and he was bringing with him 400 men. Terrified, Jacob felt for sure he was coming to destroy him, so he divided the family into 2 groups, hoping at least one of them would survive an attack. But it was also then that Jacob did what most do when things suddenly get bad or they go from bad to worse. He turned to God. And Jacob prayed, "O God, my grandfather Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you told me, return to your land and to your relatives. And you promised me, I will treat you kindly. And I'm not worthy of all the unfailing love and faithfulness you have shown to me, your servant. When I left home and I crossed the Jordan River, I owned nothing except a walking stick. And now my household fills 2 large camps. O Lord, please rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau. I'm afraid that he's coming to attack me, along with my wives and children. But you promised me that I will surely treat you kindly and will multiply your descendants until they become as numerous as the sands along the seashore, too many to count." Isn't it funny how when things get tough, many times the one that maybe we've avoided the most in our situations of life becomes the very one we cry out to save us? So often within the framework of this world, it is God who people will call upon when situations grow dark and hopeless or helpless. And sometimes that is the God of their childhood that they had, but they put away because they felt that it was just foolish fables. Sometimes it's the God of their youth that they had drifted from as they moved on into that of the far country to sow their choices they thought were going to bring them fulfillment, but found nothing, and they're at the bottom. Sometimes it's the addict who's fallen so hard because of their relapse. Sometimes it's the divorced father who got where he was through his own infidelity. Sometimes it's the older person who simply has seen the hardships of all of life, and although they've never found true joy, they realize that in the latter years of how important being tied to God was. God, Yahweh, I am, the host of heaven, who had loved them and loved us through our rebellion. The one who continued to present and continues to present opportunities for us to relinquish the control of our lives and to surrender to Him, and yet had not. The same God who many use in their words to curse and to damn others still held out and still today holds out hope for the children of His, the people, to return to Him. In Isaiah it says, "My word goes out from my mouth, and it will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." God's words, God's heart still continued to root for us, even in our own selfish life and our own selfish ways of living and our own choices, and most notably when we're trying because it's all that we can do. Even when there's no noted hope of change, He continues to plant His seeds of truth within us, even being unaware they were there until the time came that they would be returned to Him. Yes, within Jacob's prayer, he reminded God, if you look at that, he reminded God that it was Him who told him to leave where he was, and made sure to remind God, "This is what you promised me." But in this state of humility, Jacob recognized something he possibly had not said aloud before. Look at verse 10. "I'm not worthy of all your unfailing love and faithfulness that you've shown to me. For when I left home and I crossed the Jordan River, I owned nothing except a walking stick, and now my household fills 2 large camps." Jacob would send more gifts along with his wives and family, but it would be this night this very night after that he had prayed and cried out to God, he recognized the hand of God upon his life, that things would begin to turn dramatically. He would spend that night alone at the last of the east side of the Jordan before he crossed. And he saw now, though finally being isolated and finally being alone with himself, the truth of how God had walked and led him even through all those years of struggle, all those years of his own rebellion, through decades of deceit. And the reality was, God had to get him alone before he could deal with him. With all the activity of some huge entourage surrounding Jacob, he could easily busy himself with just all kinds of tasks. Yet once alone, God would command his attention, and the deceiver was about to come face to face with God himself. And much is the same with us, because sometimes we have to be stripped of the very things that we've put above God before we're willing to even engage with him, before we're willing to hear what he has to say. Sometimes we have to lose everything, or possibly see the reality of losing things that we have had that matter to us before he can really speak to us and we hear what he's saying. For some, that is their perceived reputation. For others, it's maybe years of belittling and favoritism of their children before one of them simply doesn't come around anymore. Sometimes it's just reckless choices that have led us to create our own empire where we're left standing in the wreckage of it all. We all have these areas. What would it take, or what has it taken, for God to get us alone to where we'll listen to him and that we'll hear from him? Has he been trying to do so lately? The story continues. This left Jacob all alone in the camp. And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. And when the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of the socket. And then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." And Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The reality was, in this moment, God wanted something from Jacob. He wanted all of him. All of him. God desired Jacob's proud self-reliance. He desired his scheming and the plotting in his mind. And it's evident here that God came to take it by force if necessary. The irony was, from the womb, Jacob had wrestled and tumbled, and nothing had ever stopped throughout all of his life up to this point. And now God stepped into human flesh in this instant, this moment, in order to wrestle as Jacob's creator with him toward purpose, towards change. Now we can only imagine what this scene looked like. It could have resembled a barroom brawl or even an extreme WWE fight, but the reality was somehow Jacob managed to keep up the struggle the entire night. And however he was able to do this, it's the fact that his determination to hang on in there was no greater than our own determination to have things go our way. And eventually we hope we will win God over to the things we want, but not necessarily what he does. We all have those. Which, if you haven't realized, it's a losing battle. There's no doubt God could have easily won at any time using his power here, but he was setting a record for us even as we read the story today. Sometimes we may feel like we can really contend with God. Someone in rebellion against him might seem to be doing pretty well, and the match may seem even, but as the story reveals and eventually gives warning, God can turn the tide at any moment, and he will allow the match to go on for his own purpose until its time is right. And it wasn't until God changed the nature of the struggle in a moment that Jacob would have finally felt defeated when his hip became dislocated. And the night, turning to dawn, he knew that it would not last much longer, and he clung desperately to this man through it all. This is an invaluable place for everyone to come to, where God himself conquers us. There is something to be said for every human doing their wrestling with God and then acknowledging after the wrestling the greatness of him having been defeated. We must all come to this moment where we realize we serve a God who is far greater than us, and we can't do anything to conquer him. And he has to take hold of us, and he has to lead us. Oh, throughout all of his life, Jacob had been clever and sneaky enough, or so he felt, that he didn't need to trust in God. Now he had to rely on this blessing from him. And he was reduced to the place where all he could do was hold on with everything he had. Was no more strength to fight, but he could hold on to him. And this is the place that God calls us to give up that fight and surrender to whatever it is that he's been asking of us, and then hold on to him and cling tightly so we can see, so that his path is made known and his ways are clear, and that blessing for us is found. God would answer the prayer of Jacob that he had prayed earlier. But before that he could be delivered from the hand of his brother, Jacob had to be delivered from his own self-will and his own self-reliance. Jacob thought the real enemy was outside, being Esau. But the real enemy was his fleshly nature that had not been conquered until now by God. What's he saying to us? Where are the areas that we've been fighting with the Lord as to the things that he's calling and asking of us? Many times we live and we are living under that bumper sticker. Hello, I'm trying. Becomes our mantra. But are we trying in our own human effort and our own scheming of how we think things should go? Or are we trying to follow whatever it is that God is asking of us? And so the story continues. What's your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. You will no longer be called Jacob, the man told him. From now on, you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. Please tell me your name, Jacob said. Why do you want to know my name? The man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there, and Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning the face of God, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. There's no doubt at this moment, when God asked his name and made him state it, there would have been that sense of shame admitting with all of its associations of deception and cheating. Yet the reality was that this is who he was, and Jacob had to come clean in that moment with his Creator. We often associate ourselves with perceived reputations that have become a part of us, or so we think. But God knows the truth. And many times the wrestling match we ourselves are going through brings us to such admittance of our own frailties, we do so much to hide. God wouldn't allow Jacob to cover up his name because in his case it reflected his true nature. And he's not going to let us cover up our weaknesses either. In this moment, God reached down and changed his name to Israel, which in some translations mean he who struggles with God and God rules. And more interesting, from here on, this son of Isaac will be called Jacob twice as often as you read the rest of his story through the rest of Genesis. He's called Jacob twice as often as he's called Israel throughout the rest of the book. The point, apparently, there was still plenty of old man Jacob left. And so his name is always interchanged in stories when he's relying back on his old ways of manipulation and deceit. He's called Jacob. And in stories where he is walking in faith and walking strongly, the text refers to him as Israel. There are many truths to this even for us. Because I'm afraid that there are many of us as the Lord's people who sometimes we're alternating between our own Israel and Jacob moments. Sometimes we're strong in our God and in the power of his might, and other times we're wavering and we're questioning where God is at in the middle of all of our pain, and so we're swaying back and forth, much like the reality of Jacob. That's the beauty of this story, is that it is just so relevant and poignant. And sometimes we prevail with God, and sometimes we're walking with the limp of Jacob because our flesh is weak. Jacob prevailed in the sense that he endured through his struggle until God thoroughly conquered him. And when we battle with God, which some of us here right now, we're in the fight of our life, we feel. Maybe we only win by losing ourselves in him and clinging to him. It takes the full surrender of all aspects of our life, even in the pain. This is how Jacob prevailed. And this is how we come out of this battle that we are in. If our singers would come back up. God would keep his word. He would bless Jacob. And he met his immediate needs. And in that moment, he calmed his fears with a security. He blessed him there in a place of trial and testing, and in the place of intense pleading with God, and in this place of seeing the face of God, and in this place of even his conscious weakness. The reunion with Esau was not the attack that Jacob feared. In fact, Genesis tells us that Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced and kissed him, and they both wept. But for any of that to have happened, Jacob had to come face to face with his God. And Jacob had to trust his God no matter what it appeared to be. Oh, it's true. We may be trying. And maybe we're trying a lot. But God is asking us to cling tightly to him even when we don't understand how. He's asking us to cry out to him with our need and surrender fully of who we are. What does the Lord have in mind for us, for you? Where is he placing his finger, saying, let's work on this, let's deal with this? Because our God calls us by name. He has been with us through all of the struggles, and he wants to continue with us as we move forward with him. Stand with me. Heavenly Father, I would pray that you move this hour in these moments here, and as we leave this place, that there would be something that you would take and use as you continue to shape and refine and lead us to depths of you.